Welcome everyone, they call me IntroTechOut, and in this and the next video I'm going to try and talk about every opinion I have on almost every feature in LittleBigPlanet 3. I have two underlying reasons for these videos. One, I want to give some actual useful and constructive feedback to Sumo Digital about LittleBigPlanet 3, which could be used if there's a LittleBigPlanet 4 in the making. I think this is important because most of the criticism videos that exist right now are reviews made at launch by people who are more players than creators. I'm almost exclusively a creator, so I think my thoughts could potentially be of some value to the developers. I want that creator part to be clear, by the way. I haven't bought any DLCs, I've only played through the story twice, and while I've uploaded only a few levels, I have created a lot of small scenes and gameplay ideas for fun. Reason 2 for these videos is that I want to talk a bit about the good things in LittleBigPlanet 3. This is because I feel sometimes like it goes underappreciated how many actual good improvements Sumo Digital made on the design of LittleBigPlanet 2. In this particular video I will mainly talk about the latter of the two reasons, so the good things in LittleBigPlanet 3. I will suggest some improvements and changes here and there, but there's a lot of things that make LittleBigPlanet 3 great and I want to talk about all of it. The next video will be almost exclusively about the things I would like to see the next LittleBigPlanet change, add or fix, with LittleBigPlanet 3 being used as a reference point. If you're not a big LittleBigPlanet 3 player, these videos could still be interesting to watch, as I hope they can bring people up to date on what's going on with the franchise and maybe give some insight into how the create mode is used. To give kind of an example of how I use the create mode in LittleBigPlanet 3, in the background I've put a time-lapse of me creating a dream scene in the game with a playable player-imp combination. I've tried it before, but until I saw 8's video of a dreams level, I just couldn't figure out how to make the imp look good. One last thing real quick, if you're new around here, my goal with this channel is really not to just complain about the things I find worth complaining about, but also to think of solutions to fix the problems I see with some games. I basically want to differentiate myself by being a bit more feedback focused than some other channels might be. That is also the vision for these videos. If there are specific things you would like to see addressed in LittleBigPlanet 4, you know where the comment section is, and I encourage you to talk about it. Now let's get going, by first talking about what this game does right, especially in comparison to the amazing LittleBigPlanet 2, which was the last LittleBigPlanet game on console made by Media Molecule. I will be mainly talking about the create mode, because this is where I spend almost all my time, plus enough people have talked about the story side of things already. In short, my opinion on it is that it's solid, though sometimes not as charming or well made as the LittleBigPlanet 2 campaign was. The new characters are also heavily underutilized, and I don't know if I think the hub worlds were a necessary addition. When talking create mode though, Sumo Digital have done a surprising amount of things right. First of all, instead of having 3 layers like in LittleBigPlanet 2, this game has 16, and it is so much better for it. I remember having a lot of trouble in LittleBigPlanet 2 to make or use certain objects because of the layer limit. Want to put an apple in your level? Be prepared for it to take up all the layers, which means you now have to build the level around it if you want players to be able to continue. Want to make a hallway that extends in the direction of the camera? Too bad, you now have to find a workaround with perspectives to make this work. Where the 16 layers really shine though is multiplayer create mode. If you have ever tried playing the LittleBigPlanet 2 create mode with 4 players, it's just impossible. Why? Well, if everyone is building something at the same time, you generally want everyone to have their own layer. If you want to do a car building challenge, for example, and want to race against each other with those cars, you of course don't want that you can't even pass by somebody because they're on the same layer. So 4 players on 3 layers, not fun. 4 players on 16 layers, a lot of fun. To put it into perspective, if you're playing LittleBigPlanet 3 with 4 players, literally every player has more space to themselves than the entire space of the create mode of LittleBigPlanet 2. Because of this, I would be totally okay with it if the next LittleBigPlanet featured the same amount of layers, because I haven't really run into a situation where 16 wasn't enough. Unless LittleBigPlanet 4 becomes 3D, 16 layers is as much as we need in my opinion. I would like to get some more room in the other directions though. Infinite room to be exact. Okay, let's backtrack a little. One of the big new features that LittleBigPlanet 3 brought with it is the dynamic thermometer. If you activate it, the available room in the create mode gets like 10 times bigger, but the game will only load the things most close to the player, with the player being able to make any exception they want. This system is really sophisticated, and though I've only used it a few times, there's a lot of potential here. The one minor gripe I have though is that I distinctively remember that Sumo Digital mentioned from beforehand in the marketing that the dynamic thermometer allowed for infinitely big levels. This is currently not the case. The reason why infinitely big levels would be cool is that infinite runners and procedurally generated levels would become way less headache inducing to make. Currently you need to make the world move while the player stands still if you want an infinite runner, but it's really hard to keep the player in the same spot and near impossible to let them change speed. What is great though is that Sumo has given creators the ability to move the backgrounds in LittleBigPlanet 3. You can move them left, right, up and down and in and out. The backgrounds are great, but can be a bit distracting or immersion breaking, so being able to completely get them out of the player's view was a great addition. There are also a lot of new small features that make life so much easier in LittleBigPlanet 3. I will go over the ones that stick out to me. First of all, being able to freeze the camera by clicking R3 has had a huge impact on my enjoyment of the game. Where in LittleBigPlanet 2 the camera would keep following the main player and zoom in on him every time he would stop flying, in LittleBigPlanet 3 you can keep the camera in place. This is handy if you're using the create mode with local multiplayer, because you no longer have to plant game cameras everywhere. But it's also great if you want to check if certain things in your level react accordingly to the player, even if the player couldn't see that part of the level in play mode. Talking about clicking joysticks, the ability to toggle between play and create mode with the left stick is also something I can't live without anymore. In LittleBigPlanet 2 you always had to pause the game only to have to scroll down and toggle a button somewhere in the pause menu. To be able to quickly turn it on and off and check if certain logic is visible when playing is way better. This got me thinking about another feature though, which doesn't have a button dedicated to it yet. That's the grid. The grid is great for building levels, but some things like placing decorations are more or less impossible with the grid on. It would be great if they found a way to toggle the grid in the next game as well. My suggestion would be to implement a system like the control button on the PC, by making it so holding one button and then pressing another results in a specific action. There are now a lot of new inputs possible. This would be something I'd turn off for the new players though, as LittleBigPlanet's create mode is complicated enough already to get started with. The next great thing about the create mode is the fact that you can move the camera with the touchpad. This makes LittleBigPlanet 3 one of the only two games on PS4 that I can remember using the touchpad in a way that makes sense. The reason why the touchpad camera is a great improvement is because in LittleBigPlanet games you will sometimes be really zoomed in while sculpting. But because while sculpting every single button is used, from R1, R2, L1 and L2 to both the joysticks to all the face buttons and all the directional pad buttons, there was never a way to change the camera angle while sculpting. While changing it with the touchpad in LittleBigPlanet 3 can be a bit finicky, I still like that we at least have the option to. Something else that has had a huge impact on the create mode and makes it hard to go back to LittleBigPlanet 2 is that you can make objects and materials either static or dynamic. This was a feature that originated in LittleBigPlanet Karting, and I'm really happy to see that Sumo Digital took it over to their game. For the people that maybe don't know about this, to make an object static or float in midair, which is something you want to do a lot in these games, you used to have only two options. Either use a gravity tweaker with specific settings set to 100% and stick it on every object you want to be static, or use the one specific material that already had the property of being static. So if you wanted a level where you start by jumping out of a plane and falling through the clouds, that whole plane and all those clouds had to have the gravity tweaker on them or be glued to the static material. In LittleBigPlanet 3 you flip a switch to do the same thing. What's even better is that if you make multiple things in a row static, the game remembers it and materials are now automatically set to static, so you don't even have to flip that switch every time. These kind of things can easily get lost in you, but it shows that the developers genuinely did know what the players want. The next thing I want to talk about is the logic. I've always loved the way LittleBigPlanet handles logic, and it's no different here. It's a bit hard to wrap your head around at first, but once you get going there's nothing you can't do with it. I don't believe Sumo Digital has changed much regarding the programming stuff in this game, but there are a lot of new tweakers, most of which I've used quite a lot. Being able to make things invisible with the opacity tweaker, for example, is something that really comes in handy when trying to prevent players from changing layers or going somewhere they are not supposed to go. Invisible walls are a bit cheap, yes, but it does mean you can hide a lot of things in plain sight. I always wanted an invisible material along the lines of the force field material from LittleBigPlanet Karting, but a tweaker that allows everything between 0 and 100% visibility is of course way better. I do have one issue with it though, and that is that the word opacity is used to describe the variable of visibility. This could really be just a personal thing. Once again, I'm not a natively English speaker, but the word opacity doesn't sound intuitive to me. I always go through a moment of doubt when I need to change the opacity, because I always forget if 0% opacity means completely visible or completely invisible. I would rather see the word visibility being used, but hey, maybe that's unintuitive for some other folk. Another tweaker that I use a lot is the physics tweaker, which allows you to change the weight of objects, or more importantly turn collisions off whenever you want. I've used it a great many times in combination with the opacity tweaker to create doors or to stack multiple layers of logic. Matter of fact, in the scene you see me creating in the background, I use both the opacity and physics tweaker to make sure the imp doesn't hinder the player when not activated. What I also love about LittleBigPlanet 3 in general is that the devs try to give as many of the things they have to the player. You can for example create those level maps that the story uses and essentially create your own campaign. I doubt many people use this though because of the community systems, about which I will have some things to say next video. What I do appreciate though are the character animation and rotation tweakers and the power-up pedestal. The character animation tweaker is a bit unforgiving and hard to get into, but it does allow for a lot of new gameplay styles, just because you can change the orientation the character is in all 3 axes. If you for example combine the animation tweaker with the advanced in-out mover, you can actually create a 3D platformer. I've also used the tweaker plenty of times to make top-down games. And because we can finally create our own power-ups with the power-up pedestal, shooters, sword fighting games, or like I did, Jedi battle levels are now totally in the realm of possibility. One huge problem that limits the amount of possibilities with the power-up pedestal though, is a limitation with the engine that runs LittleBigPlanet. Namely, if you create something and want it to be a power-up, you want it to fit in Sackboy's hand. The problem is that the scale stays the same if you make something a power-up. This wouldn't be a problem if LittleBigPlanet didn't have a limit on how small you can make things. If you create something and then try to make it smaller, at some point it will start deforming as the engine desperately tries to prevent too many polygons from being in too small of a spot. The 3D objects in the game most of the time don't even allow you to go small at all. Because of this, I think it would be great if there was a scaling option within the power-up tweaker, so we don't have to actually create our power-ups at a Sackboy scale. Talking about power-ups, there are of course some new ones with LittleBigPlanet 3. There's no real point in discussing them though, except the puppet power-up. The puppet power-up is a great idea. It allows players to use the create mode of the game in the play mode. While it does mostly work as intended, I do wish that in the next game there isn't a limit to the amount of things you can select for players to use. The reason for this is that I like making levels that let players build stuff, but I don't want to limit them in any way. I don't want them to have this eureka moment where they know how to solve a puzzle just to find out they can't use the tweaker they want. Something a bit larger that I want to be improved is the accessibility of creating new playable characters. This is the point where it's maybe a bit harder to follow for the people that don't play a lot of the create mode, so I'm going to explain step by step where I like what Sumo Digital has done and where I think improvement is needed. I'm sorry if you already understand everything I'm gonna say here. Unfortunately I don't really have an audience yet, and as a result I have no idea what the skill level will be of the people that see this video. Anyway, when you enter the create mode, you are the standard Sackboy who walks sideways, has a certain walking speed, certain actions he can perform, etc. You can use this character to make side-scrollers. If though you want to make anything else, let's take a top-down shooter for example, there's no way of doing it with the standard Sackboy because he can only walk sideways. What we used to do in LittleBigPlanet 2, and what I secretly still do in LittleBigPlanet 3, is to first create a Sackbot with a controlinator in his logic board that acts as a receiver. This means it's possible to remotely control him. Then we'd place a transmitting controlinator on a block of floating invisible material and make that follow the Sackbot with the help of a bit of logic. Because the player on the invisible block is not visible in play mode, it looks like the Sackbot is the player. At this point you can program anything into the Sackbot that you want. Do you want the player to become weightless when pressing a button? Go ahead. Do you want certain logic to activate once a specific player gets somewhere? No problem. Actually, there was a problem, and that was with spawning. Let's completely think this through. Imagine you're making a 4-player co-op level, and you want the game to differentiate between these players for some reason. The players will spawn as a vanilla Sackboy, but you can make them spawn in an obscured place to hide them entering their Sackbots, and voila, we have 4 different players with 4 different attributes. Now one of them gets crushed in one of your contraptions. Because the actual player is still on the invisible block at this point, only the Sackbot dies and the player stays behind, as well as the game camera, which will annoy the hell out of the other players. But okay, we can solve this by destroying the invisible block once the Sackbot dies. Alright, you spawn, once again in the vanilla Sackboy form. How do you now get this player without him noticing into a segbot again, and more importantly, how do you prevent him from entering the segbot with the logic of the other players? You want to be able to differentiate between these players after all. Well, you could solve this with some logic, though it might take a while. Now one more time, let's run through this scenario. The players spawn, enter their segbots without them knowing, and the level goes on. One of them dies and you make the invisible block self-destruct, you make the game recognize which player has died and spawn the right segbot so they can enter them, you make the game check which checkpoint was activated last so the game doesn't spawn segbots at places where they're not supposed to be, and you think you're finally done. Then you test the level with another player and you both die at the same time, which because of lag means you still get into the wrong segbot. My point is, logic is great and you can solve almost any problem with it, but at some point you have to believe there's an easier way. So thought the developers of LittleBigPlanet 3. Now, in LittleBigPlanet 3, creating a character is as simple as creating a segbot and putting one controller layer in it. You can then set any checkpoint to spawn that character, so you don't even have to think about messing with concealed segbots and destroying invisible boxes. This is a great improvement over LittleBigPlanet 2. There are still two problems though. One is kind of a glitch. When you change how Sackboy moves, like maybe in a top-down way, and when you then try to fly around in create mode, that movement is changed for some reason as well. It's often sluggish and weird, and it really shouldn't happen, as it kind of makes me not want to use this feature. The main issue that still exists with the new system though, is that while it has solved the spawning problem, it hasn't solved the different logic for different players problem. Because when tweaking a checkpoint, you can only choose one character to spawn as. This means that everyone will once again spawn with the same logic, essentially getting us nowhere. I ran into this while making a top-down competitive shooter, and while I was able to solve this problem by once again throwing a bunch of logic at it, it's of course far from ideal. I really want the option to specifically choose different characters for different players. For the last portion of this video, I'm quickly going to give my opinion on a few other tweakers and things I haven't mentioned yet. We have 1. The broadcast microchip. This automatically puts the same logic on everything in range, so you don't have to copy and paste your logic onto anything and everything in the vicinity with the added pain of having to replace all of it when you change something. An improvement I would like to see is that in addition to the option of using a circular area of effect to apply logic to objects, an option is added that just lets you select the objects you want to be affected. This is because there are often a lot of things in that area of effect that you don't want the logic to be applied to. Tweaker 2. The Shardinator. This thing basically destroys the object it's attached to when activated, by dividing it into shards and then shooting those shards outwards. I myself haven't really found a use for it yet, besides making explosions look a bit more realistic, but you can never have too many tweakers, and I'm sure someone somewhere has done something incredible with it. Tweaker 3. The Wave Generator. This bit of logic outputs a sine wave, so you can make things in your level turn on and off, move left and right, etc. Surprisingly, I've used it a lot. Whether it's to make lights flicker, danger turn on and off, or reset timers periodically, it has a lot of uses and I can't really think of any further improvements. Tweaker 4. The Gameplay Tweaker. With this tweaker you can change the behavior and weaknesses of characters whenever you want. This is also one of those great tweakers that I've only used in a few specific instances, like the Jedi Battle level, where I wanted players to be vulnerable to each other's weapon but not to their own. Tweaker 5. Well, this is not really a tweaker, but whatever. The Character Teleporter. What's great about this thing is that you can teleport players to any point you want whenever you want. In LittleBigPlanet 2 I always used to kill the player and then let them respawn somewhere else, but the new way of teleporting is of course way better. Now for the last tweaker, the Force Chip. This bit of logic pushes things around it away or pulls them in. I love messing around with physics, so this is one of those tweakers that can make a level super fun if you implement it correctly. I, for example, made a bomb survival, yes I know, level on small platforms in low gravity and used this tweaker to at one point in the level make every platform suddenly get pushed away from the center, which acts as a challenge the player has to overcome. Nothing about this tweaker has to be changed in the next game in my opinion. Alright, that was it for this video. I've probably missed some stuff, so I encourage you to put anything you want to add in the comments. Unless something Dreams related happens, my next video will be about the problems of LittleBigPlanet 3 that will need to be addressed in a sequel. I will talk about the community systems, tutorials, glitches and anything else that I have a strong opinion on. If you got through this video, respect, thank you so much for watching and see you around.